Today we are here to talk about the soon-to-be released Commander Anthology. So, you're here to figure out if it's worth buying, and the answer is yes! Thanks for tuning in, we'll see you next week. Don't forget to subscribe. Just kidding, obviously what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about the value of the entire set. Now before we do that, I just want to talk about some of the cards that are of interest in the different decks. Now I'm not going to go over all the cards because that would be 400 different cards, or well, I mean maybe a 380 with the overlap in a few of the decks, but overall that'd be too many cards to talk about. So we're just going to talk about some of the ones that are my personal interesting choices from the decks, and then we will talk about the overall value and whether this is a worthy purchase or not. So starting out with deck number one, now I'm going to assume you're all familiar with Commander. Deck number one is from Commander 2012, that's Heavenly Inferno. The commander from that deck is Kaalia of the Vast. Now this is probably the most valuable card in the entire set, actually. This is a really powerful commander that you can use. The ability is fantastic, being able to slap an angel, demon, or dragon straight into play. Not only straight into play for free, but attacking along with Kaalia. Sure, she's pretty fragile in terms of being 2/2, but it's not too hard to get her on the board and keep her going. And even just getting to slap out one creature with this is ridiculous. So that's most of the value for that deck right there all by itself. We'll just talk about some more of the other interesting cards that are included in this deck. It's got, obviously, it's going to have a bunch of angels and dragons to capitalize on her ability. One of the fantastic angels is a Chroma, Angel of Fury, the red version from originally when they did the color shifted version from the Time Spiral block. There was this red Chroma created, and it's fantastic because it has just as many ridiculous abilities as the original Chroma, but just more variety. It's an interesting contrasting version of Chroma. A really cool include the fact that it has the fire breathing makes it pretty ridiculous. Another insane angel in the deck is the Angel of Despair. And that's just a big old 5/5 flyer that when it comes into play, you get to destroy target permanent. So it's pretty self-explanatory why this card is amazing. And the artwork is pretty insane too. I'm pretty sure that the Orzhov, back when they released this, the Orzhov used these angels as sex slaves as well, which is kind of, maybe that's why it's called an Angel of Despair. Maybe that's why she has no hair. Anyways, moving on to yet another angel. This one has a ridiculous name, Bassandra. It's like they didn't even try. It's like just Cassandra, just shift the letter down, whatever. And it's not even fair because this card is great. The artwork is fantastic. I love the fact that it shuts off any spells being cast during combat, and the fact that you can force people into attacking. In a big old commander game of multiplayer, being able to force attacks becomes even more interesting. Next up, we have Mother of Runes. This fantastic little card, 1 mana for a 1/1. Obviously no problem there when it comes along with an ability that taps to protect your cards from a wide variety of threats, be it spells or even just damage from blocking. Mother of Runes is a really solid card for 1 mana. After that, we're back to angels with Teriel. Teriel is fantastic. The fact you don't even need to have flying and vigilance. Just having the ability to get the random creature card back from your opponent's graveyard is absolutely insane. But the fact that it's a 4/7 flyer with vigilance means you can swing with it, and then in the middle of the attack, if you so choose, activate the ability. That's pretty ridiculous. Next up is Syphon Flesh. This appears in a number of different commander decks, and the reason is it's very useful in big old fat multiplayer commander games. Hell, even just in a one-on-one game, it's not too bad. I mean, it's not amazing for 5 mana, but as soon as you get to hit 2 opponents with this at least, it starts to become a really attractive deal. And in large games, this can be just absolutely stupid. Speaking of absolutely stupid, we have Master Warcraft. I love this card. Being able to decide how all attacking and blocking is going to happen is fantastic. You don't even have to use it when it involves you, specifically. In a big old multiplayer, you can just pick 2 people and make them have at it. That is just fantastic. Or even more, depending on how you play with your blocking rules. Next up is Path to Exile. Not quite as good as Swords to Plowshares, but still 1 mana, letting you remove any threat, and only letting your opponent get a basic land in return is pretty solid. In Commander, in some cases, some people might not even be running basics, and in this case, it's just straight up better than Swords to Plowshares, because you just get to exile a creature for 1, so that's ridiculous. So that's a nice include. And then you've got Lightning Greaves. This card is amazing. 2 mana, and it's only 0 to equip, and you get Shroud and Haste for that. Now, in more recent decks, you'll see things like Swiftfoot Boots, and they're good, but Lightning Greaves is amazing. It's so much better. It's unfortunate that they've switched to Swiftfoot Boots, but considering the power of Lightning Greaves, I'm not that surprised. And we'll talk about it now. It's going to show up in multiple decks. That's the Sol Ring. Obviously, this card is ridiculous. They would never make something like this now where you can just pay 1 mana, get an artifact that taps for 2, comes into play untapped, ready to go with literally no downside. Sol Ring is an absolutely amazing card. And I think it's fantastic that they included it in so many Commander decks, because before they chose to do that, it was a really hard to track down card. And obviously, if everybody doesn't have one, it's a pretty unfair playing field, because this allows you to easily get to 4 mana on your second turn bare minimum. Next up, we have the other big value card in the set, not nearly the same as Kaalia, but not set, sorry, I mean this particular deck. Not quite the same as Kaalia. We got Stranglehold here, and this card is very interesting. It just shuts off your opponent's ability to search through their libraries, and also makes sure that opponents can't take extra turns. So it shuts down particular strategies in a fantastic way. And considering the number of tutor effects that are lovely to use in Commander, Stranglehold is fantastic. And also, the flavor text on this card is incredible. The correct answer to a Barbarian's Riddle is to choke on your cleverness and die. That is so good. So unsubtle, so red. Love this card. Next up, we have the Vow Cycle. There are various versions of this showing up in different decks. We have the white, the Vow of Lightning, the Vow of Duty, and the Vow of Malice in this deck. I enjoy them because you can either use them to boost your own creatures and ensure that if they are stolen, that they can't be used against you, or you can put them on opponents' creatures, and then they can use them to attack anybody else in a multiplayer game, except for you or your planeswalkers. So these cards are great. They're very, very versatile. I really like them. And then we have Command Tower. This land in Commander is ridiculous. It basically just straight up taps for a mana of any color that your deck could ever need with no downside. Doesn't come into play tap, has no requirement of you paying mana to get that mana, just any color that your Commander's color identity is, you can produce with this. And considering you're not going to have anything outside your color identity, that makes this land incredible. And the final card from this deck is another land. This one's just, it's just so interesting. When this first came out, it just threw me off. A land that can turn into a creature, basically. Or sorry, a creature that turns into a land, vice versa, right? You put it out as a morph creature, and then in response to something like a creature kill spell, you can actually go ahead and morph it, and then it's a land, and the spell would no longer be valid and be countered as long as that was the only target of the spell. So it has some fun, interesting interactions, and it's the only card that goes from a creature to a land in this fashion. So I do enjoy that there is a morph card out there that also happens to be a land. So that wraps up the first deck. Deck number 2 is called Evasive Maneuvers. Now this one came out in 2013, so the previous one was 2012, this one's 2013, and it will go, they basically picked one deck from each year. Obviously it's called Anthology for a reason. And I like the way that they've done this. I think that the decks they've selected are pretty good choices. I mean, obviously, it's hard to know exactly what the best choices would be, but it seems like they didn't go too badly with the balance here. So, deck 2 is Evasive Maneuvers. Now, the commander for this deck is Derevi, Imperial Tactician. This card is interesting. It's not particularly valuable, but it's an interesting card. This isn't something I would choose particularly for commander. In my opinion, this, of the 4 commanders, is the least exciting, honestly. So we'll just move on to the actual interesting cards from this particular set that we have here. Bane of Progress. This card is fantastic. It can become huge and handle a whole bunch of problems all at once. Absolutely love this card. I'm a big fan of gigantic green creatures, and green always loves to smash up artifacts and enchantments. Getting the +1/+1 counters is just cherry on the sundae for that one. Next up, we have Djinn of Infinite Deceits. I really like this card. 2/7 flying, and you can use it to swap 2 creatures. It doesn't matter whose creatures they are. You can muck about with your opponent's creatures. You can muck about with yours in a big multiplayer game. A lot of applications for this guy. And 7 toughness means it's not going to be easy to kill him, and you can use him for blocking and then tap to activate his ability. So really enjoy this dude right here. Next up, we have Karmic Guide, a 5 mana for a 2/2 flying pro-black angel that straight up brings a creature card back from your graveyard into play. Is such a good deal. The echo cost, half the time you can ignore it if you don't want to keep it around, and if you got the extra mana kicking around, hell, why not keep it? The pro-black makes it way harder to kill, and you can use it to block a number of creatures in Commander, so I really am a fan of Karmic Guide. Next up, we have an oddity, Luzun the Scholar General. This is really cool because it has the Horsemanship, and Horsemanship is Portal 3 Kingdoms version of flying, essentially, where if you don't have flying, you can't fuck with the flyer. Well, if you don't have Horsemanship, you can't fuck with the people on the horse, man. Oh, that was terrible. So, on top of being unblockable, essentially, because how many people are even playing Horsemanship creatures, this guy will net you a card every time you hit your opponent with it. So basically, it's almost like a guaranteed card draw every turn if they can't kill it, because they definitely won't be blocking it. Big fan of this guy. Next up, we have Mirror Entity, which probably has the most bizarre art in the entire set. I mean, just look at what's going on here. First of all, they're weird alien beings. They just look, all these changelings. They're so bizarre. And then this dude here somehow has a reflective chest that's just making everybody else think they're like him. He is sharing his ugliness with the world. It's just terrifying. But anyways, the card itself, the ability is fantastic. The fact that you can change all your creatures to a set power and toughness means you can do gigantic boosts on your army. Really like it. Do not like the artwork. Really hope that they change the artwork, but I doubt they will. Next up, we have Murkfiend Liege, giving your green and blue creatures +1/+1, which are fantastic, especially if you're playing with the other hybrid ones and getting that boost on all of them. And the fact that you get to untap all your green and blue creatures during each other player's untap step is just absolutely ridiculous when you're playing Commander. You can have all your guys up on every player's turn. So solid. Alright, and on to Rune of the Hidden Realm. 5 mana for a 4/4 with Vigilance and Trample, not too shabby. Tack on the ability to exile another creature, either to use it in a combat situation to defend yourself or a creature of yours, or to just get extra uses off of come into play effects. This is a really, really solid legendary creature right here. Next up is Rubinia Soulsinger. You can just straight up steal somebody's creature with her and not give it back until you feel like it. This is so good. I absolutely love having control magic effects on a creature that you can just tap to take another creature with, and this one has no restrictions. Most creatures that tap to take another creature will care about that creature's power, care about you having certain types of permanents, things of that nature. Rubinia is just straight up, no, forget it. I'll make anybody sign this contract. Everybody's my bitch. This card is one of my favorite cards in Magic. And on to Restore. This is an interesting sorcery that lets you put a land card from anybody's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, which is great. I mean, there's so many different lands being used in Commander and a lot of ways to destroy lands, so that if your opponent has anything interesting, you can go ahead and end up snagging it yourself after destroying it, or just get back something of your own. It's really versatile. I'm a huge fan of Restore. Another awesome green card in the deck is Krosan Grip. 3 mana, smoke a artifact or enchantment, which obviously for 3 mana it's a pretty hefty cost, but the fact that it's split second, which makes it impossible to respond to, makes this an amazing card. Even if they have an artifact they could normally sacrifice in response, you can straight up destroy it and there's nothing they can do. I love Krosan Grip. Unexpectedly Absent is an interesting card that only exists in the Commander decks. The fact that you can squirrel something really, really far down into your opponent's deck is awesome. I love the fact that it's not just set to 1 or 2 and that you can do X at instant speed. So if you have a lot of mana, you can just be like, yeah, you know what, screw it. Let's put that guy 10 cards from the top. Have fun not having that for the next 10 turns. That is a really fun way to mess about with people. And the second last card we're going to talk about in this deck is Thousand Year Elixir. This card is great. You just put it out and you no longer have to treat creatures with activated abilities as if they have summoning sickness in regards to those abilities, on top of being able to pay 1 mana to activate a creature a second time. So you can put out somebody with a ridiculous tap ability like Visara the Dreadful and then untap it, use her twice the turn she comes out. That's so good. Okay, last card from the deck is Opal Palace. It's one of the commander-specific lands that are only good in this format. Basically, how it works is if you use this land to cast your commander using the second ability, not the first one, then basically it gets a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of times you've cast it from your command zone. So each time you cast your commander, you can bring it back bigger and bigger. This is a great card. Deck number 3 is Guided by Nature. This one is the 2014 release, and the commander from this deck is Freyalise Llanowar's Fury. Now this one is really interesting because this marks the set where they decided they would make planeswalkers that could act as commanders, and that was very interesting. I was not expecting that. Now this deck I think is actually my favorite of the 4, but that's because personally I like green decks and big effects and elf tokens and all that kind of jazz. So no further ado, let's take a look at the fun cards that are in Guided by Nature. Jiraga Warcaller. This little elf is ridiculous and only gets dumber the further along in the game you get. The multi-kicker gets so out of control, and the fact that he boosts himself and then acts as a gigantic lord for all your other elves, it gets so out of hand. In fact, you'll see a lot of this deck is based around just having got a bunch of elves and triggering retarded effects with them, activating insane things. Basically, the next card is a perfect example. We've got Priest of Titania. So for a green and a colorless, you get a 1/1 elf that gives you a mana for every elf you have on the battlefield. That adds up really quickly, and it's a similar theme that we're going to see through a lot of the cards. The next one's Well-Wisher, and instead of mana, it's gain a life for every elf on the battlefield. And that, again, these all add up into just stupefying amounts of life and mana and silliness, which I absolutely adore. And the elves keep coming. We've got Imperious Perfect to boost all your other elves, and for just 1 mana, it puts a 1/1 elf warrior token onto the battlefield. But that may as well be a 2/2, because as long as you have the Imperious Perfect, it's going to have that +1/+1. So basically, this thing makes a 2/2 for 1 mana that will also work with your Well-Wishers, your Priest of Titania, your Jiraga Warcallers. It's so much fun. And continuing down the elf train, we've got Elvish Archdruid. He's the oldest, pruniest. Oh my, look at that face. Good lord, what's he made out of? Wood? Jesus, how do you even tell the difference between his staff and his face? Anyways, he boosts all your elf by +1/+1 and has the ability of Priest of Titania. So basically he's just a Priest of Titania, slap an extra green onto him to give a lord effect. This deck is just silly and fun, and there's so many sweet little elves. I'm not going to go over all of them because you can take a look at the deck list yourself, but I am definitely going to touch on a few more of the fun ones. Like Ezuri, Renegade Leader. For 1 mana, you can regenerate an elf, and for 5 mana, you can overrun with your elf, and it's not even limited to once a turn. You can do that as many times as you can afford to do it, and considering you have a Priest of Titania, Elvish Archdruid, this is pretty crazy. For a deck with only 1 Oz, it seems like it can have a lot of nutty fun. This actually is a really interesting deck. And one of the most bonkers elves is the Immaculate Magistrate. This one is just stupid. Instead of just giving +1/+1 or +X like the Timberwatch elf does, and that's a good elf, but this puts +1/+1 counters on, equal to the number of elves you have. That's just dumb. Things are going to grow, and they're going to grow quickly. I really enjoy the interplay of elves throughout this deck, and there are a few other fun cards that go well with the elves that aren't specifically elves themselves, like the Wolfbriar Elemental. For 4 mana, you get your 4/4, but then you can pay as much extra as you want, and for every green you pay, you get a 2/2 wolf token, which is pretty friggin' sweet. That'll build up really quickly, really quickly. The Creeper Hulk also is another, this one is bizarre. This is commander only. It's a 5/5 trampler that somehow allows you to pay 2 mana to turn target creature into a 5/5. So if you haven't got out all your boost guys and don't have gigantic creatures, you can even turn your little 1/1 chumps into gigantic 5/5s with trample for 2 mana. It's really cool. I like the Creeper Hulk. It's only 5 for a 5/5. Seems really good. Next up is one of my all-time favorite green creatures, Primordial Sage. I have loved green since I started playing this game, and being able to pay 6 mana. 6 mana used to get me a Crawworm, a 6/4 with no abilities. Instead, I get a 4/5 that whenever I cast a creature spell, I get to draw a card. This guy is ridiculous, and the artwork is hilarious too. He's just this gigantic Jabba the Hutt snake dude just hanging up on top of the hill, and everyone's just hanging out having a party down on the hill by him. You know who's not having a party though? Thunderfoot Baloth. Look at this thing. This thing's nuts. I love it because its ability specifically cares about you having your command row, and when you do, this guy gets a boost, and he makes your other guys into real problems as well. I love that. That's so cool. Next is Desert Twister. This is a card that I have enjoyed since the dawn of Magic. 6 mana to destroy any permanent. Normally green doesn't have direct creature kill or the ability to handle certain things, so just being able to smoke anything you want with this is great, and I really enjoyed the artwork. This is much better than the original artwork. And then we have Praetor's Council. Good lord, does this card have a high mana cost, but what you get in return is hefty indeed. Your entire graveyard back into your hand, and on top of that, they solve the problem of you going, what am I going to do with these 20 cards I just got back, by going, your hand size is now no longer limited, so you can keep them all. I love that. I love the fact that it returns everything and then goes, and for the rest of the game, don't worry about it. You don't have to discard from having too many cards. And for some insane reason, they decided to include Skull Clamp in this deck. That is just bonkers. That's just, you put things like Imperious Perfect and this together, and it's just, they just churn out tokens, and then you can just off them and draw cards. Skull Clamp is a card that never should have been printed in the first place. I mean, I love that they put it in the deck, but it's also insane to me. The artwork is incredible, though. I really like it. It's bizarre, but incredible. Another interesting artifact is Assault Suit. You give an equipped creature +2/+2 haste, and most interestingly, the creature that is equipped with it can no longer attack you or a planeswalker you control and can't be sacrificed. So, if your opponent's playing sack effects, that'll protect your guy. If they steal it from you, you don't have to worry about them attacking you with it. They can only attack other people. And if you're feeling generous, you can even loan the creature out with this equipment, which is really interesting. Second last card in this deck we're going to talk about is Beastmaster Ascension. 3 mana enchantment. Every time you attack with a creature, you get to put a quest counter on it, and once you hit 7, all your creatures have +5/+5. This thing makes everybody a problem real fast. This is an insane card, especially with all the little wangs that you have in this deck and the amount of mana you'll have going. It won't take long before all your elves are gigantic tiger elves, which just would look... Actually, that'd be pretty cool artwork, honestly. And the final card from the deck is one of the coolest for sure. Song of the Dryads. 3 mana, enchant permanent. Whatever permanent you enchant with it is now a colorless forest land. How bizarre is that? It's such an effect that you don't see really on almost anything, let alone the green specifically getting to strip something down to being a forest. I mean, it makes sense flavor-wise, but I am kind of sick of them reusing the concept in this flavor text where basically it's like, once you come into this particular grove, you're just going to stick around. It's been used on a whole bunch of different cards, and it's kind of boring. So that wraps up deck number 3. Let's take a look at the final deck. There's a lot of stuff here. Deck number 4, Plunder the Graves. This one was released in 2015, rounding out the 4 years. Commander for this deck is Meren of Clan, now Toth. Gains experience counters, and the number of experience counters on it determines whether you get to return creatures from your graveyard to your hand or straight into play. Pretty cool conceptually, and very powerful card. Pretty sought after. It was a good choice to include this in the set of 4 because a lot of people want this guy, and he's not cheap. He's not easy to get. This is probably the second most valuable card in the entire box set, right after Kali of the Vast. So let's talk about Meren's deck. First off, Wall of Blossoms, 2 mana for a 0/4 where you get to draw yourself a card. Always loved green cards. Always loved green cards that have come into play effects that give you something. Give me a land, let me draw a card. I love coming out ahead in the deal. And Wall of Blossoms is so effective. Only 2 mana and it nets you a card. Always love this card. Next up is Skullwinder. This is a cool one because it's got the death touch going on. So I mean, you got your 1/3 snake and kill anything that it fights, but it also has somewhat of an Eternal Witness effect. I mean, yes, you do have to let your opponent get something as well. I mean, if they don't have anything in the graveyard, sure, you can do it that way, or you can pick the least threat. So I mean, this is, in some ways, it's not as interesting as Eternal Witness, but the fact that it has death touch and you're playing in Commander where there are a lot of big creatures, 1 power but being able to actually kill something versus having 2 power and just dying to anything you fight is actually, it's a pretty good trade-off. It's interesting that this card is uncommon, the way that they do the rarity for commanders is honestly very weird. I mean, they have a lot of they make sure that the commanders are mythic. That one's pretty obvious. And when they're reprinting a lot of rares, they generally reprint them as rares. When they're reprinting cards, they almost always have the exact same rarity they had from previous iterations. But when it comes to new cards, like Skullwinder, like specifically for commander decks, they will mark them as uncommon. And sometimes it appears that's because they appear across multiple decks, but sometimes it doesn't appear to be that way. I don't know if it's just because I haven't seen that they're in multiple decks, or it's just not the case. But it's weird that some cards in a deck where basically you're only getting one copy of everything, so a rare and mythic, it's all printed at the same time in the same way. So the one thing that I find really weird about the whole commander thing is the rarity issue. But maybe they just try and gauge what kind of power level the card would be at for when they would release it in a set outside of Commander, or maybe they do it to give people who don't have that much of a grasp of the game an idea of what level to trade it on or value it on. Like, if you draw an uncommon card, it's not going to be as powerful or rare. Either way, it's interesting. Food for thought. So let's move on. Bloodspore Thrinax is the next card, another fanciful green card with Devour. Now, normally a lot of the Devour cards I don't care for, but there are a few that are really cool, and this definitely is one of them. The fact that if you're willing to let this guy eat some of your little wangs, then you will, or I mean, guess bigger ones depending on what kind of situation you're in. If you're willing to feed him, then he will make sure that your other guys come into play bigger. Of course, there are other ways to put counters on him too, because it doesn't have to specifically come from his ability. So this card seems, I haven't actually seen it in play, but it definitely seems very potent. Next up is an oldie but a goodie from the Lowland block. We've got Shriekmaw. This card is great. You can either pay its full cost and get it to stick around, or in a pinch, you can pay 2 mana, slap it out, kill a creature, and off it goes. Especially helpful if you have things that care about stuff hitting your graveyard, or you want to use the ability of your commander in this case. So it's an excellent inclusion in this deck. Next up is MacLeod. This is the other cool Devour creature. It has Devour 2, so every creature you feed to it, it is going to get 2+1/+1 counters, and that's how many creatures it is going to give you for free every single turn. So you have to weigh your options. It's always hard to decide just how many guys to feed to this dude, but the results are almost always magnificent, unless of course he gets killed immediately. Next we have Mazarek Crawl Death Priest. This thing is crazy. Whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, he gets a +1/+1 counter, and the thing has flying. It will not take long for this card to get absolutely out of control. It doesn't even require your opponents to be sacrificing, it's anybody. Absolutely love this card. More fun green, we've got Pathbreaker Ibex. Whenever this thing attacks, it gives all your guys trample and a boost equal to the power of the strongest creature you have out. That is so ridiculous and fun. Speaking of ridiculous, Scourge of Nel Toth. Ever wanted a 6/6 dragon for 2 mana? Yeah, you can make that happen from your graveyard. That's just silly. Casting it normally, it's meh, but the other way of getting it is just silly good. Next up is Collar of the Pack. This card's pretty simple, just a gigantic 8/6 trampler that whenever it attacks will create a copy of itself and send it at every one of your opponents. How awesome is that? Wretched Confluence. You get to choose 3, and you can choose the same mode more than once. How awesome is that? Do you want to get a bunch of cards? Do you want to start killing creatures? Do you want stuff back from your graveyard? You can do it all, or just focus on one. So good. Alright, second last card from this deck is the amazing Eldrazi Monument. This card is so dumb. Creatures you control have +1/+1 flying, and oh, by the way, they're indestructible. And all you have to do is feed it 1 creature a turn. Gee, I wonder if that'll combine well with the commander from this deck. Eldrazi Monument is an amazing include in this deck. And finally, rounding out what I find of interest in this deck is High Market. I love this land. You can sack creatures. Sure, you only gain 1 life, but that's not what it's about. It's having a sacrifice outlet. For cards like the previous one that we talked about, that cares about your sacrifice and stuff. This is fantastic. They tossed it in as a land. It's hard for them to deal with. Anytime somebody's about to do something that only takes care of 1 creature, if it's any kind of spell that's going to give them a bonus, you can just ice your own dude, and then their spell gets countered. Fantastic. Alright, so that wraps up the list of cards that I find of interest in all 4 decks. So the next step is to talk about the actual financial value of this and determine if it is worth your time to purchase this. Okay, so to break this down, basically The value of the cards in the box, roughly, are worth about $550. Now, there are additional things you can take into... If you don't want to take into account additional factors, that's fine. But when I am determining the value of this, I'm going to factor in everything that's included that I think makes a difference. And I'm going to try and be reasonable with these numbers. So, $550 is the rough value of the cards. And then on top of that, it comes with 4 special life counters. These are the 100-sided life spinner dice, basically, and there's 4 of them, and they look really nice. These were originally seen in the Commander's Arsenal deck box. Now, those were extremely limited. The allocation for the Commander's Arsenal was really, really low. I don't know, I think it might have been as low as 5, even for the highest level stores. So, the dice from that, or not dice, sorry, the spin down counter from that is rarer than these ones. Obviously, just from the fact that there's 4 in the package makes them more common, and then the fact that there are more of these being released. Now, this is still a very limited product. There's only, basically, there's 3 levels you can be at when it comes to allocations for this type of product, and at the highest level, which is Advanced Plus, at most you can get 15. Their range is 12 to 15 copies. That's for the Advanced Plus. That's how many Anthology they can get. The advanced levels get 8 to 10, and core levels only get 3 to 5. So even if you look, let's say, for example, I'm going to use the theory that every single store that exists is Advanced Plus. So look at it from that perspective, okay? And we're going to say that they get 15 copies, just to give you the most leeway in terms of price valuations. So this thing is essentially at 15 copies, 3 times as common as Commander's Arsenal was, assuming that there will never be any more re-releases and this allocation is all you'll ever get. The Commander's Arsenal package is 3 times as rare as Commander Anthology. Now, if there was just 1 die, or 1 spin down involved in both those, that would be a direct comparison. However, there are 4, which makes them actually 4 times as common as that. So it makes them 12 times as common. Again, they do have like a cool design to them. They're, in all honesty, nicer looking than the one that was included with the original Commander's Arsenal, because I own that one. And these ones look nicer, at least in the image. I mean, I'll have to see them in person to know for sure if they look just like that, but they do seem to be more attractive. I think that given the fact that one of these spin downs is worth about 30 to 40 American, actually we're talking Canadian prices, my apologies, that's what we were talking before. So in Canadian, it would be worth about 50. So we'd say it's worth about $50. And then these other dice, because of their commonality, could be anywhere from $5 to $15 in value. So we'll go right in the middle and we'll say $10. So we're going to say each of these spin downs, these 100-sided spin downs, are $10 each. And I think that's reasonable to say, depending on where you live. Just to give you an example, if you live in a city where there are, let's say you live in a smaller city and there's three to four Magic stores in your city, and let's be generous and say somehow they all get to Advanced Plus level. So that's only 60 copies of this in the entire city, right? That's for everybody. And so you've got those copies, each of them have 4 spin down, but first of all, there's going to be people who won't break sets. There's going to be some insane people who want more than the ones they originally come with. So there's clearly not going to be enough to go around. So I think valuing it at $10 each is probably reasonable. And depending on how frequently they release these styles of spin down, that would affect that valuation as well. So bear that in mind. But either way, going forward, $10 on each of those spin dice. So that's basically an extra $40 in value. So we have the $550 for the cards. You have $40 for the spin down. And then also included with that, you can include, if you want, the boxes, the deck boxes that come with it, the outer packaging, which is actually quite nice. Now, some people don't count those. Personally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, there's a pack of 80 tokens that are included. I'm going to take the 80 tokens, the deck boxes, the big cardboard box, all the packaging, everything else, and I'm going to value that at $10. So that brings the entire valuation of the set to $600. Now, even if you factor in the fact that this release does put out more copies of the cards that are in these decks, which will tend to lower the prices, the level that these are being released on, again, at most, like under a dream situation in a city with 4 stores, you would have 60 copies for that entire city of like 200, 300,000 people with however many hundreds or 1,000. I don't know exactly what the numbers are for numbers of Magic players, but just keep in mind that this is a very limited set. So even if you take some, if you chop off 20% off the valuation of the cards, you're still going to end up way above whatever the asking price is that people have for this. The US, what is it, MSRP is something like $170. So depending on where you live, if you're in Canada or America, even if you take this as American, basically $600 Canadian is the value of this right now, $450 American. So when you compare that to the suggested retail price, it's totally, absolutely worth getting. You can't lose. The value of the cards, it's, aside from Magic just completely dying, you virtually can't lose on the value put into it, and you're basically going to come out ahead numerically. I mean, on the money side, financially, it's a straight up win. So yeah, if you can get your hands on one, because of how limited these are, again, the best stores, the Advanced Plus, are only going to have 15 copies. So depending on where you are and who you are, you may be able to get this or may not. But the advice is that this is 100% strong. Yes, get it. It's totally worth it. Well, thanks for checking out my analysis. If you have any comments, feel free to let me know. This is the first time I've done a video like this. Next week, I am actually going to go ahead and cover the upcoming Arc Enemy Nicol Bolas set in the same fashion. So that will be interesting. Come on back and check it out.